Hello there. Today's questions, really, because there are several that overlap, are really about the Flavian Dynasty that was founded by Vespasian, who becomes emperor. He's the sort of last man standing after the civil war that follows the death of Nero, so the year of four emperors, as it's often known. There have been questions about him, there have been questions about Titus, and it was a remarkable achievement on the part of Vespasian. He does found this new dynasty that gives Rome stability from, 70 through to 96. So 26 years, that may not sound like much in the great sweep of nations, but in terms of the public life of Rome and how violent it had been for that year after Nero, then it's fairly good. He is the only emperor, really, who in Suetonius' Lives of the 12 Caesars is depicted as someone whose character improved after they reached high office. Suetonius is fairly favourable to Titus. Again, there's a similar element that he was, not quite so nice, but responsible as emperor. But of course, Titus doesn't live very long. He dies under slightly mysterious circumstances, but not the fictional stuff we've been getting on the Amazon, those about to die and all that sort of stuff. That's all made up. There are rumours of murder, because there nearly always are rumours when an emperor dies, particularly when his successor is less popular than he was, and certainly than he is perceived in hindsight. But nevertheless, there's a fair chance people do die young. We don't know. We have no clear evidence of murder. Vespasian is a pretty old man by the time he becomes emperor, and already has these two. Domitian's in his late teens, but Titus is in his 30s. He has commanded a legion under his father in the war against the rebels in Judea, and has been left in command when Vespasian is proclaimed emperor and manages to rally most of the armies of the eastern provinces. He goes off not to lead the invasion of Italy himself, but to sort of preside from a distance over the campaign. Titus is left to command in Judea and to complete the suppression of the rebellion, which by this time is really focusing around Jerusalem. And there's the long, several-month siege of Jerusalem that we'll look at in more detail in another video. That'll be a long one, because that's quite a big topic, and I need to get some old slides of mine scanned so that I can get the right pictures in. So Vespasian has already had a fairly normal senatorial career. He's a new man. The Flavian family are not from the old established aristocracy. They're sort of local gentry from the Italian countryside. He's made a lot of his money breeding mules to sell them primarily to the army, but more widely. Italy is not particularly good horse racing country, at least not much of it. It's also, you go there today, and the obvious truth you can't help seeing is the Apennines running like a spine down the whole peninsula. But also there are lots of parts of Italy that are very hilly, quite rugged. Mules have always been more practical in terms of transport, for pulling carts, carrying panniers, burdens, also for riding in Italy than horses are. They're a bit tougher, they can cope with the bad terrain, and they keep going. So it's been quite a big deal. Ventidius Bassus, who's done very well under Caesar and then Mark Antony, and as noted, the only person for a long time to celebrate a triumph over the Parthians. He's also been a mule breeder. He's done quite well in this. So it's not the honourable profession that a senator would parade, but nevertheless it's successful. Vespasian, also his brother Sabinus, have had a political career. Now, Vespasian commanded Legio II Augusta in the invasion of Britain under Claudius, and captured the Isle of Wight, suppressed two tribes, captured a load of hill forts, including places like Maiden Castle, Hod Hill, this sort of thing. So there's an interesting connection, and it's a reminder as well. We often think of Britain as a fairly obscure part on the fringes of the empire, but quite a lot of important people came here one stage or another. He's governed in North Africa. He's not always done well there. He's been accused of corruption. There was a riot. He was pelted with vegetables at one point during time there. He gets a reputation for being, he always has this reputation for being a little bit greedy and wanting money and being, very keen to charge the fullest price. When he becomes emperor, he retains this, but he does, of course, have the big problem is that, first of all, Nero has spent like there's no tomorrow, and then you've had the disruption of civil war and everybody taking money from the treasury to pay troops, to bribe them to support you. So he inherits a very messy situation. Vespasian does restore order, restore stability. When he dies, he is succeeded by Titus, who is then succeeded by his younger brother Domitian. Things go pear-shaped with Domitian, but not immediately. Domitian is emperor for 15 years. He is not a popular emperor and has all the personality failings of the bad emperor that you get depicted by Suetonius. And sadly, we don't have Tacitus histories that cover the period after AD 70. So it would have been really nice to have a detailed account of the Flavian Dynasty and what they're doing. So we've got bits and pieces. We don't have good detailed narrative history. We've got biography from Suetonius. But Suetonius, by this stage, lost his job under Hadrian of working in the Imperial Archives as a senior secretary and dealing with a lot of imperial correspondence, so he doesn't have access. There is more detail in the lives of, say, Tiberius or Augustus, the earlier ones, than there are later for the later emperors, which they're shorter, there's just less in them. Vespasian certainly restores order. He is perceived and generally remembered as a good emperor. Even the jokes about him are at his funeral, for instance, an actor wearing his mask and some of his regalia, he's walking along in this great grand procession and asks the crowd, oh, how much does all this cost? And they tell him, oh, it's millions and millions, all this sort of thing. He says, oh, that's far too much, just chuck me in the river and charge a few quid. People understand that he is grasping, he wants money, he's very careful about raising taxes and this sort of thing because the state needs this. He is not wasteful. He doesn't. Yes, you have grand projects like the Colosseum. You of course have then afterwards the Arch of Titus. All these things you can see there in the centre of Rome today and are grand. These have come from the spoils of Jerusalem and elsewhere, but also they are not. It's not like Nero's Golden House. When the city of Rome burns down, Nero decides himself to build himself a much bigger palace on a lot of the site. You don't get that sort of thing under the Flavians. They are far more responsible. These are public amenities, things to enhance the glory of Rome, not themselves primarily. He seems to, there are probably tense periods for several years, and there are hints of opponents, rivals within the Senate. One big change does occur with Vespasian is that up until then, with the exception of Galba, Otho and Vitellius, the three predecessors in the four emperors, every emperor has succeeded by stages in that they've been voted powers one at a time. There isn't a position of princeps of emperor. Augustus creates a system that pretends not to be a monarchy, not to have emperors at all. And so you get voted tribunician potestas, you get the greater than proconsular imperium, all this sort of thing, by stages and other honours that mark you out. And there's usually a successor marked out when the emperor dies, who then succeeds without too much trouble. A little bit different with Caligula's murder and Claudius, but even he has voted things in stages in the traditional way. Vespasian has a law passed early on that gives him all of these powers in one go. And in a sense, it sort of institutionalizes the position of emperor. There's a formula you can do, the Senate can go to and say, okay, we're making some emperor and they need this power, this power, this power, this honour. And he gets that. He then, however, copies the old system and he starts to share some of these with Titus, who has them for shorter periods, a sort of less full version. So again, it's obvious that he's going to succeed. But that does mark a change. So on the one hand, Vespasian stabilizes things. He creates a precedent because the Julio-Claudian family has pretty much wiped itself out with Nero. There's now no blood connection with Augustus, anybody like that. And in Vespasian's case, you don't even have good connection with any of the major families from the nobility of the Republic. That, of course, means that you can broaden the access to who will become emperor. You can start to, there is a, Tacitus talks about a debate when Tiberius pretends that he doesn't want to be emperor. After the death of Augustus, they briefly consider, well, who amongst the Senate is fit to be emperor? And the same thing happens in the debate when Caligula has been murdered before the Senate finds out from Herod Agrippa that, in fact, the Praetorian Guard have already proclaimed Claudius, so, doesn't matter what you think, this is what's going to happen. You have a brief discussion of, do we reform the Republic again, but after then you're looking around at your number and saying, well, who could be emperor? Vespasian's success shows that you actually have to broaden the range. It isn't simply a small number of aristocrats that can do this. There are more senators that base their achievement, and you can look at things like character and ability. So Vespasian stabilizes things, but also the sheer fact that he's got there means that you're opening the option. The ambition of becoming emperor can now become a more realistic one to far more people than it could before. But it's still fairly restrained. Titus's premature death is one of the other issues raised, and whether 2nd century AD would have been very different if Titus had lived on, had a son, had lived on long enough for that son to grow up to be of an age to succeed him and cope, rather than Domitian. Two things really to say about this. I mean, beyond the basic introductory thing that, as with all what-ifs, we simply don't know. So you can imagine a glorious, perfect world of everybody, dancing through the meadows and being very happy, because Titus is a better emperor. If you've got Mozart's operas and the Clemenza di Tito, one of the arias is all about, the only good thing about being a king is that you can be nice to people, basically, you can do good things. Titus can be celebrated. He doesn't really have a chance to do a lot. He isn't emperor for very long. He has achieved a slightly dubious reputation as Vespasian's enforcer. So he's taken over control of the Praetorian Guard for a while, breaking the old tradition of you have these two prefects that are from outside the family, not connected, just to make sure. And again, we have to remember, we take Vespasian's success for granted, but he couldn't and people didn't at the time. It shows a lot of his political savvy and his good luck, but mixture of luck and skill, that made his new regime work and made sure there wasn't another civil war. And then cleared up the mess. That year of 4 emperors has spread devastation around a large part of the Roman Empire, and before that, Nero's misrule, you've had rebellions in Judea, you've had them in Britain, you've had them on the Rhineland as part of the Civil War. There has been a lot of disorder. There is a lot to get going again, restore stability. And there will be stability. There won't be another civil war for well over a century. It's nearly 130 years before the next one. That's, okay, it's still not ideal that you have another one, but nevertheless, that's a long period of stability. So even without Titus living on longer, as it happens as he dies, you have Domitian. Domitian, when you look really at what he actually does, on the whole, he seems to have ruled the empire fairly well, appointed reasonably good people as governors, as commanders. People like Agricola continue in their post in Britain under Domitian. He's been appointed by Vespasian originally, confirmed by Titus, then confirmed by Domitian, and gets an extra long command, longer period than is normal, and is allowed fairly free rein in his campaign. So although Tacitus talks about Domitian becoming jealous of him, restraining him when he could have completed this conquest, and they could have had all of Britain forever and all this sort of thing, that's very much what the sort of things he needs to say to praise his father-in-law and a good senator and present this ideal. And also remember, Tacitus is writing under a new regime after Domitian has been murdered, so you've got to say, well, lots of good people did well under Domitian, but they were held back. Good people, including my good self. Domitian generally appoints good commanders. However, you have the disaster in Dacia when he appoints Cornelius Fuscus. A Praetorian prefect is given a senatorial command to command an army. Now, we don't know whether that was a good choice or not. It does lead to a disaster, so obviously in that respect it's not a good one. Whether a senatorial appointee, somebody coming through the normal system, would have done any better, whether Fuscus was a damn fool who created a mess, got an army slaughtered, or whether there were mistakes that he simply underestimated the enemy, as many Romans would have done. So those wars, the wars against the Marcomanni, the Quadi, these other groups that start to appear, Germanic tribes on the further up the Danube, Domitian's army, there are problems there. That's one of the reasons why they pull out from the conquests in northern Britain within years. So, each Tuthill, this legionary fortress built in Scotland, is abandoned before it's fully complete. The Gas Ridge line, that's pulled, they pull back from there. They retreat almost to the line of what Hadrian's Wall will be within the space of a fairly short period in the latter years of Domitian. So there's withdrawal there. Whether that was we've overreached ourselves and we don't have enough troops because we need them on the Danube, whether it was actually we're starting to occupy this area of the Highlands, was it really worth it? We're spending too much in garrison for the money we're going to collect. You can see this in various ways. It doesn't help that we don't have the detail. So Domitian may not have been as terrible an emperor and all that. He's certainly not a Nero. He's not bankrupting the state. On the other hand, he doesn't get on well with the Senate. He starts executing senators. However, it's not the Senate who kill him. It's a conspiracy within his own household. So, that's a sign that it's unpopular there. The Senate then appoints Nerva, this elderly senator who basically nobody's got anything against. He's the compromise candidate. Elderly, doesn't have a son. It's a sort of stopgap measure. He's not going to last long. There isn't a clear successor. He then adopts Trajan. Trajan is, of course, one of Gibbon's 5 good emperors. Trajan is generally remembered very favourably in our sources. Hadrian is not remembered favourably, but in modern analysis tends to come out as rather a good emperor. Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius, you've got this period of most of the 2nd century until Commodus comes along and gnaws the whole thing up. Things are going pretty well. And this is the height of the Roman Empire, prosperity, population. It's when many of the great monuments, particularly in the provinces, are built. The grander things there often from this period, never quite as wealthy again, even though you'll have the Antonine plagues and things. So on the one hand, you could say, well, if Titus had survived, if he'd bequeathed it to a son and the son had been just as good as Titus and Vespasian had been, you might have got this anyway. On the other hand, you can't know that. Domitian is a bit of a blip in that he's unpopular, he kills people, he doesn't seem to have been a nice individual, but that he was not a terrible emperor in terms of how the empire worked under him. So that then leads to a sort of golden age in many respects. Would that have happened if Titus had passed it on to a son? Who knows? Marcus Aurelius passes on the rule to Commodus, and Commodus makes a complete pig's breakfast of it. He lasts 12 years, but nevertheless he's not a good emperor. It's the Dio Cassius comment. It's not that he's evil, he's just stupid. He was a weird person and didn't like the hard work of being an emperor, was far less diligent than his father. So somebody who has that great air of decency about him, and Marcus Aurelius leaves us the Meditations, where you have the ruler of the known world is wondering about how not to become a tyrant, how to rule well, how to benefit people. It's quite a thing. You might not necessarily have got that anyway. So it is rather messy. You can't predict. I would generally say I think Vespasian does stand out. He's someone you can admire. He was a good emperor. Not perfect, because who is, but nevertheless, he restored the Roman state, but also it is marking a process. But on the other hand, broadening the net that when you're trawling for emperors, that you start to include people like that leads to the Trajans, the Hadrians, Marcus Aurelius, people like Antoninus Pius. These people who are not necessarily from the very old established aristocratic families, but prove to be people of great capacity. They're good at the job. And it's almost better if the emperor can choose a successor from someone who isn't in his family, because then he can choose someone on the basis of ability. And they do quite a good job. But again, they might well have chosen badly. That's how it plays out. So Flavians matter. The Flavians give a stability to the empire that allow it to last for much longer. But there are other factors with them. They don't do that on their own. If Titus had not died rather, maybe it would have been better, but maybe not. Things do work out quite well after Domitian, and even Domitian's reign is not a disaster in terms of how the empire is administered. Hadrian, again, we remember him favourably. He was not a popular man at the time or afterwards, but generally speaking, you look and you feel, well, this chap actually governed and ruled well. So Flavians are important. I'm a big Vespasian fan. Titus, from what you can see of him, seems to have done a reasonable job. Domitian wasn't a nice person, but was actually not a bad emperor. And what happens in the 2nd century is very much this golden age. So who knows the what ifs, if Titus had lasted longer, if he'd had a son who'd succeeded him, what might have happened, who knows. But we can't really say with that sort of thing. So that's it for today's question. Thanks for watching.